Howdy, historians. How's it going? Welcome back to the Great Depression flip video. I can speak at times. Okay, we've seen the causes of the Great Depression over not one, not two, but three vids. Now we're getting ready to see Hoover's failed response. Oh, poor Herbert Hoover. So much of your presidency is timing and then responding well to what happens during your time in office. Bad timing plus bad response equals Herbert Hoover's time in office. Most presidential historians consider Herbert Hoover the worst president, if not one of the top three. All right, some people will put Nixon up there because he absolutely 100% would have impeached because he abused his power in office. Some people will put in a couple of the different presidents that come before Civil War for not doing enough to prevent the coming of the Civil War. Like Buchanan slides in there a lot. But Hoover is always like Hoover and Nixon. That's really the main questions for who it's going to be. And I don't know, either one of them is a good option for me. Part of Hoover's real problem is, again, he's just going to have a response of too little too late and just inadequate. Sorry, I got a little sleepy in my eye there. I don't know where that came from. It's bugging me. Okay. All right. There we go. Get my contact reset. So you've got your lecture outline. You know where we're going to go. Here he is with his beloved German Shepherd. And here's just a portrait. Whoa. Portrait of him just looking dapper in his late 1920s suit there. Okay, so Hoover, poor President Hoover, like most other people, he really believed that this financial crisis was going to be like a lot of the other panics and recessions that we had seen. It'd be about a year, the market would correct itself, and then things would move on. You'll hear that term every now and then, market correction. Sometimes there's just something going on in the stock market or in economics where excuse me, just kind of needs to work itself out. Takes about a year or so, right? Like with the panics that we had seen in the past, but that's not going to be the case. One thing that made the Great Depression so difficult to fix is something that we've talked about a little bit already with the causes. This was really an international depression, and this was something that people at the time were slow to understand, that this was something that was impacting everybody. So Hoover's response, one of the reasons why it gets a lot of heat is because it's just too little. The other response is because it's too late and it's not well informed enough. Hoover and his administration didn't really understand this was an international depression. Also, they were very slow to take action and address this crisis. Hoover had this saying, prosperity's just around the corner. And he kept saying it all the time, prosperity's just around the corner. It's just around the corner. Better times are coming. Just hold on. Just wait. And it just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And he was seen as slow and inactive, right? So those are not good things you want to see. Now, or be known for. So this is truly international. All of our markets are tied together, Europe, Southeast Asia, and the United States. Now, one of the first things that the Hoover administration did was put in the Hawley-Smooth tariff of 1930. This was the highest tariff ever. Now, we already know from the causes that tariffs are a problem. We have now identified that tariffs were one of the main causes of the Great Depression because they prohibited exchanging of goods in international markets and they slowed down international trade. Well, the Hawley-Smooth tariff increased the tariff from 31% to 49%. So any foreign-made product coming into the United States now had a 49% tax on it, right? So you're going to take a $2 product and now it's going to be $2, you're going to take a $2 product and now you're going to add a 98 cents tax on it, right? 99-cent tax on it. So this is going to be really bad. All right, because in retaliation, every European country slapped high tariffs on U.S. products, and the effect was that we already, leading up before the Hawley-Smooth tariff, had a reduction in international trade and very few international markets. The effect of the Hawley-Smooth tariff is that it basically stopped trade between nations, meaning that both national and international economies sank even further into depression. What they really should have done at this time is remove the tariff or drastically reduced it, and then others would have done the same. But unfortunately, that wasn't the response. It also just kind of wasn't the economic dogma, the economic thinking of the time. People believed in the tariff. Big backfire here. And people start to realize it relatively quickly, but they don't fix it until FDR gets into office. Now, one good idea that Hoover had was the debt moratorium, an idea that he floated in 1931. Now, the debt moratorium, the idea here was that we were going to pause and suspend all payments of international debts. One thing we talked about in the causes is that there was still a lot of debt in the international economic system from World War I. Now, after Dub won, there was this plan put in place called the... Oh, come back, bring to front. There we go. Called the Dawes and Young Plan. Okay, so this was how everyone was going to repay each other for all the debts that they had following World War I. It's the dumbest plan in the world when you really look at it. All right, now the idea of Hoover here with the debt moratorium is we're going to stop all these payments, because if we can stop the debt repayment plan for a little bit, then what we're going to see is countries can invest this money in spending back home so they can try to attack the Depression. Okay, I'm going to try to write on this again. We'll see how it goes. All right. So really this starts with the U.S., okay? So the U.S. is going to take $2.5 billion and give that to Germany in the form of a loan. And then Germany is going to use that money to repay the Allies for all of the war reparation payments they need to make from World War I. And then the Allies, from all the stuff they bought from the United States in World War I, repay us $2.6 billion. So it's this insane web of debt that's just going around and around and around in the economic international system here that's dragging down economies because governments don't have as much money to spend because they're spending all of their money on this system. So Hoover's best idea was this: let's pause these payments, because we were giving the $2.5 billion to Germany. We're giving it to them in stages and from different banks. And then Germany's taking that money and giving it to the Allies in stages. And then the Allies are taking the money they owe us from everything they bought during World War I and paying us back in stages. Hoover says, let's just pause it. And then if we just pause it, everyone can spend that money on things they need to for their country to address this financial panic. England and Germany jumped on board right away. They're like, yep, good idea. This will be helpful. France said no. And this was something that everybody had to agree to. France said no because they just really said, we need this money to try to address these problems because we don't have other money to spend back at home. And this, again, just made the international depression even worse. And it made it difficult for governments to be able to respond to the needs of their people on the domestic front. So the debt moratorium was a good idea. It just never went in. Now, domestically, Hoover's got a couple plans. One is the Federal Farm Board. All right, the unrest on farms as prices and conditions continued to deteriorate was getting worse and worse. This had really been happening since the end of World War I. The Federal Farm Board had been created, and really it was there to try to hold grain and cotton in storage facilities, so that way farmers didn't have to sell it until prices rebounded. So it was like free storage of grain and cotton, so that way you could wait to sell your grain and cotton until the price went up and the markets rebounded a little bit, and it was basically free storage. It was a good idea, but it wasn't ambitious enough to really make any real difference for the plight of farmers. Farmers were still totally beat up, and just being able to temporarily store grain wasn't enough. We got a political cartoon here from a Tennessee newspaper where, here's Hoover, a question mark coming out of his head, a blueprint in his back pocket, and you've got the beat up Federal Farm Board, which is going to be a big part of his 1932 platform, one plank that's likely to be called, like the pulled off, right? Not work well. It just shows here in this one, Hoover doesn't really have a good understanding of the plight of farmers and doesn't have a good plan to try to solve the problems that the country faces. Another good idea that Hoover had, but it was way too little, way too late, was the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, the RFC. This was a government-owned corporation created by Congress in early 1932. The goal was what today we'd call a bailout, right? So this is where the federal government is going to start this corporation called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, and they're going to give money to big businesses so that way they don't go bankrupt, so that way they don't close their doors. They're going to try to give money to prop up, to support railroads, banks, life insurance companies, other financial institutions, so that way they don't have to close their doors and fire a bunch of people. That way also what they're hoping for, this is one of the first times we see the idea of a trickle-down theory in economics. You give money up high. Try to get my hand in here. There you go. Put money at the top of the system, big banks, life insurance companies, railroads, let them stay open, and then the benefits trickle down to everybody else in the population. Sometimes that can work a little bit. It's good to prevent huge layoffs and firings and closures and bankruptcies, but it doesn't really stimulate the economy in a big way, because then the people that are working there just hoard their money and put it in the bank, so it's not like a big stimulus. Today what you see a lot more of is like giving individuals checks. They did that in 2008. They might do that again in 2020, it looks like. So the RFC is a trickle-down idea. So let the big guys stay open, and that will help everybody else. It was an okay idea, but it was way too little, way too late, right? By this point, 1932, unemployment is up around like 20-25%. GDP has dropped by about 50%, and all you're doing is you're saying, farmers, you can store stuff for free, and we're going to prop up some big businesses and not allow them to fail. It's just not enough. There's not enough going on. Then the ultimate defeat for Hoover in his response to the onset of the Great Depression was this instance called the Bonus March of the Bonus Army. So in the summer of 1932, just right before the election, right? Summer of 1932, before the election, World War I veterans marched to Washington and demanded a bonus that had been promised to them, hence the Bonus March of the Bonus Army. Okay, so these are World War I vets. They march on Washington, D.C. They had been promised a bonus for their military service. Now, that bonus wasn't supposed to come until 1945. Okay, so it's a ways down the road. But they marched on D.C., they organized themselves, and they said, we want our bonus now. We want to spend it when we need it. We want the money when we need it. We don't want, to die before we have the opportunity to get our bonus for our service in World War I. And eventually about 17,000 veterans and their wives and children crammed into this little shanty town in Washington, D.C., and asked Congress for their bonuses. And under the leadership of, Hoover and his Republican administration, Congress decided to not give them their bonus. Things got worse when 2 protesters were killed in an altercation with police. And Hoover really felt that this was getting out of control, that this was like rule of the mob, mobocracy, right? Shays Rebellion. So what we saw happen here is Hoover ordered that the army break up the shantytown and get the bonus marchers out of Washington, D.C. And he sent in a young general, General Douglas MacArthur, who will be very important in World War II. And he said, listen, I just want you to clear these bonus marchers out, clear the bonus army. MacArthur went way above his orders. He rolled in with tanks, he rolled in with flamethrowers, he rolled in with tear gas, and destroyed the shantytown, burned up a lot of these people's only possessions because they had been evicted from their homes or their homes had been foreclosed on. And this was terrible PR. It saw Hoover as ruthless. People started to see Hoover as ruthless. They saw him as uncaring. They saw him as, oh, watch out if you're ever a politician, out of touch with what was really going on. And it was like the straw that broke the camel's back. It was the last thing. People really felt his response wasn't enough. Right? We pass a tariff that makes things worse. We propose a debt moratorium that we can't get the rest of the country or the rest of the world to get on board with. The Federal Farm Board is way too little, way too late, and doesn't really address any of the main problems of farmers. The RFC isn't helping the average ordinary Joe. It's only helping the big guy. We're hoping the benefits are going to trickle down. They're not. And then we're burning down the shanty village of World War I veterans. Oh my God. You want to commit political suicide? Treat veterans poorly, right? And this is summer of 1932, right before the election of 1932. So this just opens up the door for FDR to absolutely dominate the election of 1932. And you can actually find news coverage of this where you can see them, literally burning down the possessions of these veterans, forcing them out of D.C., shooting them with tear gas, burning everything down. And like I said, it just opens the door for FDR to win the election in 1932 and really displays Hoover as out of touch and ineffective as a politician. So disaster for the country in 1932. Things are getting out of control, but FDR is going to come in and he's going to be able to bring some stability to everything that's happening with his 3 R's. All right, so that's where we are. Next time we pick up, we'll look at the election of 1932, how FDR dominates and starts to bring faith back to the American people and faith back to our government. So, great job. I don't know. I think my answer is yes, it'd be easier, but maybe it'd be worse to have everything sunny. See you guys. Adios.